All right, awesome. Thank you so much, Renuka. So now I'm going to be talking about Panama and just some major landmarks there. And the reason I chose to talk about Panama is because I actually had the opportunity to visit Panama and work in some of the other areas in a medical clinic. And I found that during my time there, I really enjoyed immersing myself in the culture, the language, and a lot of what the nation really had to offer. So I'm really excited to be able to talk about some of the landmarks that you can find here in Panama and how they relate to the history of the nation. So this is just an overall map of the country of Panama. It's found in Central America, and the border on the right, if you can see all the way on the right, actually borders Colombia, and that's the beginning of South America. So Panama is located in this really interesting sweet spot between the two Americas. And so as you can see in the middle of the country, you see three little black stars, and those are where the three landmarks that I'm going to be talking about are actually located. And as you can tell, the three stars are very close together, and they're found mainly within the main part of Panama City and the central portions of the actual country. But as we can see here in this picture, I just wanted to show that even though the three landmarks that I'm going to be talking about are located all within the middle part of the country, Panama is actually a very diverse nation. It's actually made up of 10 different provinces that are all characterized by different kinds of people, different kinds of religions and heritages. And so I actually had the opportunity to work in the Darien province, which is that brown region all the way to the right, the one that is the closest to Colombia on the right. And it was there that I was able to work more with indigenous populations or more people, tribal kind of people who had been living within this area for really like hundreds of years, far before Panama was even an independent country. But as you can tell with this map, with the different provinces and the different types of people, Panama definitely does have a lot to offer. So it's really great to keep in mind. So now moving on to the landmarks that I'll be discussing today. The first one, and possibly the most notable and the most recognizable landmark in Panama, is actually the Panama Canal. And so the Panama Canal was built between 1903 and 1914. And the reason that it was built was because when ships were involved in trading, goods and different kinds of products, it was very difficult for countries to be able to ship their products from Europe and Asia into America because there was no real way to connect to the western parts of the Americas. And so there was a lot of talk for a major part of history, especially within the 1800s, of potentially building a canal within the Panama region to allow for entrance for boats and ships and really make trade a lot easier. And so that had been in the works for quite a while, but because of a lot of political reasons and because a lot of people weren't treated the way that they thought they would be within Panama itself, the canal wasn't really built until much later in 1903, and that was when Theodore Roosevelt actually struck an agreement with the Panamanian government. And what's really interesting about the Panama Canal is that it was built right after Panama really got its independence. At the time, there were some Colombian forces that were trying to really take over Panama and try to assert their control over the country. But when Theodore Roosevelt at the time as the president sent in American troops to help the Panamanian people that were living there, they were able to strike up a deal that cost $10 million in order to begin building the Panama Canal. And so at the time, it was really notable because it was a mark of growing international relations, because at the time, America didn't really have many alliances within Central or South America or anywhere within the Latin American landscape. So it was a big deal at the time. But unfortunately now, more in the future, around the 1960s, 1970s, there have been some growing tensions because there is kind of the notion that America does kind of control this part of the Panama country landscape. And so that has been a little problematic, but overall it's really been helpful in terms of trade and allowing for ships to pass through. And so as you can see in these images here, the Panama Canal is very frequently utilized ship route in which many different ships go through in terms of trading and transporting goods all across the country. And on top of that, as you can see in the top left over there, there are actually a lot of cruise ships as well that actually pass through the Panama Canal. So it really is a very bustling and very busy place, and it's really helped shape the manner of global interconnectedness that we see today. And so for the next landmark that I wanted to talk about, I'll be discussing the Iglesia del Carmen. So this is actually a really special church that you can find within Panama City. and it was officially inaugurated in 1953. So it's still relatively new compared to some of the other churches that you can see in Latin America. But it is located within the heart of Panama City, and as a result of that, because it is one of the biggest and most iconic churches within the capital of Panama, it's heavily visited by many tourists and many practicing people who practice the faith as well, who live within Panama itself. And the church is actually dedicated to the Virgin Mary, and so it does hold a very special place within the city of Panama City. And what's really iconic about it is that it is one of the really truly Gothic pieces of architecture in all of Panama. And so it's really emblematic in that it really displays some of the more Spanish roots that were found in medieval times as this area of Panama was growing within its history. And so these are just some of the pictures of the Iglesia del Carmen. As you can see on the bigger picture on the right, inside the actual building itself, it has giant arches and beautiful paintings and sculptures. So it really is a church that a lot of people do recommend visiting just because it's really nice to look at from the inside. From the outside as well, as you can see at the bottom left in that picture, it does have, it is quite big, and it's also very iconic in the way the two pillars kind of come out of it. And that's why it's one of the biggest tourist attractions and landmarks in Panama. And then the last landmark in Panama that I wanted to talk about is the Palacio Boulevard. And so the Palacio Boulevard actually means the Palace of Boulevard. And so this really is just like a giant palace and building pretty much that you can find within the outskirts of Panama City. And it's located within a place called the Plaza Boulevard in Panama City. And as of right now, this building holds a lot of tours for tourists to be able to go inside and really look at it. And it also has the special purpose of housing the Ministry of Foreign Relations. So it is also a very important political building that you can find within Panama. Initially, though, the Palacio Boulevard does actually have a very interesting history because the palace was actually meant to house a grand nation named La Gran Colombia back in the 19th century that was meant to be led by Simón Bolívar. Back in the 19th century, Simón Bolívar was a major military figure within Latin America who helped rid Spanish inquisitions within Latin America and he really helped give independence to a lot of the countries such as Colombia, Venezuela, and Panama as well. And back at the time when he helped to get this independence, he wanted to make a giant Latin American, South American, basically mega country in which multiple countries would come together and form this massive kind of centralized South American hub. And so that was his plan. And so because of that, he chose Panama because it was smack dab in the middle between the vast majority of Latin America and in the middle of South America. And he wanted to call it La Gran Colombia or the Great Colombia. But unfortunately for Simón Bolívar, because of a lot of the issues that came with being able to do that, he wasn't able to successfully undertake that. But to this day, interestingly enough, there is actually an ancient Panamanian chapter of the Bolivarian Society that Simón Bolívar started back in the 19th century that still meets annually here once a year. And so I think that's really cool that a tradition that started way back about 200 years ago is still intact to this very day. And so these are just some of the pictures of the Palacio Boulevard. As you can see at the top left, like I said before, it does house the Ministry of Foreign Relations. So you can see lots of different flags representing different nations and different kinds of ethnicities and whatnot. And on the inside as well, as you can see the picture on the right, it is a very big palace that was meant to house, a lot of the political figures, the major political figures at the time. So it really is really regal and it's beautiful on the inside as well. So it's definitely a major landmark.